chance to get out. Hansama falls. SK Telecom T1 will be your second team in the semifinals, claiming victory over Misfits Gaming.
Hello, good evening, and welcome everybody to Worlds Tonight. I am Trevor QuickShot Henry, joined here on the stage where one of the upsets, the biggest upsets in World history was denied. I'm joined by Crumbzz and Kobe. Crumbzz, what the hell happened today?
We just had one of Europe's proudest moments, Trevor, and it almost was historic.
It was so close, and it wasn't just the fact that they were upsetting SKT, you know, our multi-time defending champions here. It was the way in which they did it. This meta that every single League of Legends player that I've heard, you know, streamers, competitive players, solo queue players, everyone fed up with this Ardent Sensor meta, and they push SKT to a game 5 where neither team is building this item. They have the engaged supports, and it was just fireworks the entire day.
I definitely want to break down each of these games because it kind of felt like by the end of it, both Misfits and SKT kind of went Ardent Sensor be damned in many ways. Let's start with game 1 because straight out the gates, SKT showed up and crushed all of Europe under their thumb. It was a 25-minute stomp. Misfits had mechanical errors. They had macro errors. I mean, it looked like it was going to be 3-0 quick day.
I believe your exact words were, "I'm bored, get me out of here," after the first game, Trevor.
Not entirely true. I mean, you are paraphrasing.
You gave up hope a little bit early, and it was, you know, it was the same old SKT that we're used to, right? They draft the Galio, huge pick right now, and they were able to just steamroll over Misfits in game number 1.
Right. SKT truly outdrafted them, taking the Galio, because I thought Misfits probably thought that they had to take away the Tarek, that it would have just hindered their entire composition. But in the end, I don't think they expected the Jace chop to be so powerful with how SKT was running it. So they just had one game to realize, okay, this is what SKT is going to bring. Let's see what we can do later.
Picks and bans became kind of a running theme throughout this series. When we eventually get to game 5, I want to ask your opinions on whether or not Misfits were backed into a hole or not. Because Galio, now off the pick and ban table for the rest of the day. We go into game 2, and if I just check my pick ban rotation here, last rotation blue side is Gnar and Blitzcrank. Now, Kobe, Ignar on Blitz. What did you think at the beginning of the game, and then what did you think at the end of the game?
At the beginning of the game, I thought, oh, this is going to be an exciting game, finally here. And then during the game, it felt like he landed upwards of 90% of his hooks in this game. It was constant playmaking from him. And that's the big thing about it, right? You know, Blitzcrank was such a risky pick. Here on your screen, you're going to see the Leona game. And that was the Fervor Leona game, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. First, the thing that they're sacrificing with the Ardent Sensor, right, is this big gold value. However, it's hard to put a big gold value on that level of playmaking. And that's why Blitzcrank is so risky, right? Because you can't always expect these types of plays. But Ignar was flashing forward, no hesitation, over and over, the rest of the team all charging.
But I don't think it was just the Blitzcrank, though, because they had a synergy between that and Sejuani where you didn't see just Ignar going in for the hooks every time. It was Max Lore could start a fight with the Sejuani ultimate, and then you follow up with the Blitzcrank hook. So you 100% guarantee yourself a pick from him. Just the range of the hook and the Sejuani ultimate, which was really impressive. And that's how they found a lot of picks in the mid game that I don't think SKT expected, and let alone respected out of Misfits.
If they didn't expect it, what did they expect? What did they think about the Fervor Leona?
Also, I just got to add, he landed a lot of hooks on people that were not stunned by Sejuani.
He did, but it was like they were, I think the synergy was there.
It definitely was. To your Fervor Leona comment though, Trevor, that watching the kills on bottom, the 2 kills in lane on bottom was such a surreal moment because we didn't even realize until that point that she had Fervor as she was stacking it up.
There's no way Bang even knew at that point. He's like, oh, it's got to be Colossal, so Leona. And they're like, that's 18 points in offense for Leona.
Well, the thing is, that was the Misfits game plan, wasn't it, right? So, like, I know we're tunneling a lot on the Ignar champion picks, but I want to zoom out and say, you know, at the beginning of that Blitzcrank game, we had that tower dive that went awful for Misfits. They donated 2 kills to Bang's Cogmore. You look at the next game, there's a couple of picks and a couple of fights that go really awry. I mean, Misfits really felt like they were playing with name tags off, and they were trying to play that very aggressive, that very style their team comp needed.
I'd actually challenge that. I think they were playing with name tags on because remember, they did want SKT to begin with. That's because they saw the weaknesses in SKT, and as Jad had pointed out, this SKT did not look like the SKT that somehow gets better in the playoff, in the knockout stage, they simply were the same group stage SKT, so the preparation would have been more relevant. They could have seen this team's not going to respect our plays. This team is going to be getting caught out here and there. They're going to just pick strangely if we push them to do so, and it worked wonderfully.
I really like the point of them actually, recognizing that, yes, this is SKT. Some people, when they're faced with challenges, will shy away from it or, will be scared or will alter their play. But Misfits were invigorated by this, right? And that we've seen it all tournament long from them, how they are so willing and so ready to step up to these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, is it better to have played and won with Fervor Leona on the world stage?
Yes.
Or to have not played at all? I heard someone say backstage, it was a fantastic line. But you mentioned it. You mentioned SKT. We've spoken about Misfits a lot, but game 4, Misfits bite off more than they can chew. It's an even game. They're going, the macro, they're going late versus SKT. It feels like Misfits are in the lead, and then they start pushing under the inhibitor turrets, and Crumbzz, this is where it all turns around.
This is the fight, because the setup for it was they picked off blank before this. It was a 5v4 sieging mid lane tower, and here we're just going to look at the final, or rather that game 4 Realm Warp into it after SKT managed to come back, but the fight all started with Misfits having the decision to say, do we just play it slow, take inhibitor, go to Baron, end the game, or can we go for the jugular right now? And it didn't work.
And it was literally stepping in, and at the first turret shot that is fired, SKT flipped the switch, and you get to see the speed with which they usually punish people for making mistakes like that. And that was kind of the sobering moment of this series, because as soon as you saw them go so quickly offensive after that turret dive, and Faker is in there with the Realm Warp, and they immediately clean up these kills, and then you have the one down by the Dragon as well. That's the one where everyone was like, oh yes, we're still dealing with SKT here, no matter what state we've seen from them previously.
And that's momentum too, because that changed the entire tone of the series now, because game 5 was so slow by comparison to everything else. We were just thinking, well, none of these teams want to make a mistake, because now Misfits know just how quickly SKT can capitalize, and SKT is still on the back foot thinking, we got to respect Misfits.
What do you think of that game 5? The tempo slows down. SKT tried to have a couple of creative engages. We saw the Tristana Tahm Kench engage in the mid lane that ended up backfiring, giving Misfits 2 kills. There was this element of hope, despite the fact SKT still remained in control, despite the fact SKT's team comp had all of the answers against Misfits.
So I think a reason why it slowed down was the carries for Misfits were massively more immobile than any other time before. When you have Varus and Syndra that are probably the 2 slowest mid laners right now, you have to take your time with every single play, and that means that you can't just be running around the map looking for every opportunity. You have to take time to pre-plan it, to set it up. And when you have J-Split pushing on the side lane, even though he wasn't grouped up as often as previous games, well, it's just going to put everything on a much slower tempo that Misfits had more time to make mistakes, I suppose.
Also, one of the things you highlighted earlier was Maxlor, right? And this was such an outstanding series from him. In game number 5, though, SKT's bottom lane, Tristana Tahm Kench, is one of the most frustrating lanes to try and accomplish anything in. Then on the top side, they have the Shen into Jace matchup, and it seemed like there were very few options for Maxlor, especially with SKT subbing in blank and trying to target Maxlor more. It seemed like that was a very clear adaptation that they made within this series, and it definitely showed up in this one.
Yeah, you can actually see a number of those fights and picks on your screen right now. The final team fight, truthfully, the game felt over by this point. Of course, there was that trade for Huni in exchange for Ignar. Huni just teleports in from behind, and it's an easy cleanup. And SKT, despite being pushed, despite almost being at breaking point, they still have another gear. They still have another place to come in. Crumbzz, is this a game or a series that SKT won, or a series that Misfits lost because of that game 4 team fight? Where do you look at?
Misfits lost the game at game 4, absolutely. They had that game in the bag, except for that play. But if you look at it from SKT's perspective, they will look at this and still consider that they lost. Like, they do not hold their head high from this one, especially hearing how Huni mentioned that they thought the series was going to be very difficult, considering how poorly their practice had been going.
Yeah, that was one of the things how Huni had talked about the practice that SKT had recently wasn't going that well, and it kind of echoes a lot of the stories that we were talking about earlier. How SKT in their kind of weakened state, they talk about in group stages. Koma came out and he was like, "Oh yeah, we use that to find our own weaknesses." It sounds it sounds like they found a lot of weaknesses and they were still patching them up.
Well, we have to see how they repair them. Of course, they will be facing the winner of RNG versus Fnatic later in the tournament. But let's focus then on the meta. We talked a lot about picks and bans. We touched on very specifically the sort of support picks that Ignar was pulling out. Tristana ended up being pivotal, first picked by SKT in the last game. Removing that from Hans Summer all of a sudden changed the tone. Rise, Crumbzz, you said backstage, 100% win rates on SKT. But tournament-wide, he's 9-18. So that champion is not finding success everywhere else. Let's talk about the meta within this series and how it's drastically different from what we're seeing a lot of other teams playing.
Well, the teams were clearly two teams that weren't coming in very hot. Remember Misfits number 2 seed, they were looking at as the underdogs, and then SKT looking like the weakened state. So these two teams have to find ways to get ahead of the competition. What's one way to do it? Don't play what they're playing. Keep innovating. You've got Ignar that has all the hook champions in the bottom lane and SKT with a big champion pool. So normally it's going to happen that, hey, you pick this, and if they're picking that as an answer to the current meta, then now they have to one-up themselves, and you keep bouncing back and forth until you end up with Vayne with Ginsu's Rage Blade.
And there was
early on.
there was a very clear focus from Misfits early on the Tristana, and that I think is probably the best point that you bring up here to focus on so early, because with these AD carry picks, so many of the other popular AD carries in the this series meta are low mobility. You know, the Varus, the Twitch, the Kog'Maw, all of these things have this really high damage output. You can get Rage Blade, and you can have really good synergy with Ardent Sensors. However, Tristana is the most popular one that still has the rocket jump, coupled with her ultimate, the Buster Shot as well, and has the ability to take turrets. So there are a lot of unique things that come together in Tristana's kit, I think, that made her just skyrocket in priority in this series. Misfits obviously had her already from the very beginning at a high priority, but then SKT caught on.
And not only the champion and the kit, but I mean, in Hans Summer's hands, I mean, this kid just went off. I think DeFischer used the words, this is a breakout tournament. He was a middle to upper pack AD carry in Europe. And here at Worlds, from group stages and now today, you're really seeing the upper echelon of what this guy can do.
Because previously, he was all about the Xayah, and he was having these huge Xayah performances, and everyone is focusing on the champion. But you have to focus on the player if they're able to switch so cleanly like this.
Well, let's take a look. Speaking about AD carries, we're going to move on to tomorrow's matchup now, as we talked a lot about today. It is going to be RNG versus Fnatic. The winner, of course, will be playing SKT. They've got a lot of juicy information to look at. And just before I ask you guys opinions on tomorrow's matchup, I want to keep you up to date. The one player from Latin America North that has correctly predicted 100% of Worlds 2017 remains at 100% because he correctly predicted SKT today.
Ooh, that was a close one.
It was very close. Very, very close. Latin American North definitely holding on to their pride. But yeah, let's turn our attention, of course, today. Hans Summer stole the show, maybe with some great backup dancers in Ignar and Max Law. What about tomorrow? Uzi versus Reckless. Crumbzz, let's get you on record. And what do you expect to see?
So tomorrow actually is, I think, even wilder than today and yesterday, because these two teams are incredibly emotional. You've got Uzi and RNG that is known to just collapse out of nowhere, and same with Fnatic, especially since both rely so heavily on their AD carries. If one game is to happen like game one against Misfits, I think a team tilts, and it's just one way or the other. So I think it's going to be a toss-up. How can we not say that, considering what we saw from game one or day 1, 2, and the preparation out the window?
Kobe, I had this thought backstage, and I want to explore it with you. Is 2017 World Championship the World Championship of upsets? You know, when you think of the storylines and you think of all the stuff that's happened.
Every World Championship we have, the thing that I remember the most are always the upsets. So every World Championship looking back is the World Championship of upsets for me. Like Albus Luna, right? I'm remembering Kaboom. All of these big names. As soon as I say the name of one team, you immediately can bring to mind like an entire series.
Now, of course, today the upset did not happen. We see the bracket. Kobe, talk to me a little bit about RNG and Fnatic. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
So I definitely agree with everybody talking all about the AD carries. Uzi and Reckless are definitely big, and those are stars, and they are incredibly emotional. You know, people are already taking bets who's going to end up crying at the end of this one. But
too soon, dude.
I want to also return to the mid lane. because Xiaohu and Caps are both pivotal for their teams. You know, we've had all these stats about, oh yeah, in the beginning, you know, Broxel wasn't camping for Caps and they did poorly, and then he started throwing a couple ganks there and a little bit of focus, and Caps went off in a lot of their wins. Xiaohu, I think, has been just an outstanding performer for this team as well.
Well, the interesting thing about Xiaohu is that he's got a godly KDA. I think it's like 24 right now, but his stats are all pretty bad compared to Caps, who actually shines a lot in his statistics or when they win, and they go down the drain when he loses. And it just contrasts the play style that they have, whereas Xiaohu really just goes about pressure. Let's make sure that we do that, and he doesn't really try to participate in terms of damage, especially with the champion pool. He got a lot of Galio compared to Caps that he just wants to be in the front line, dealing as much as possible, trying to steal some of that DPS spot.
I'm also excited to see the jungle. I think a lot of people are kind of sweeping Brox under the rug a little bit, not talking about him and his champion pool. It's not necessarily super meta. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. We'll have to see their performance tomorrow. I have one last closing thought that I do want to explore. All the weaknesses that we've seen, all the times I've heard this is the weakest SKT ever. Is this SKT going to make that run to finals? It's a tough question.
I think that they will be able to make it to finals. I'm definitely not 100% sure. And I definitely recognize a lot of the holes that have been poked in this team. But as Huni said, they're going to get right back to the grind. And you have to have some modicum of faith, right?
I'm going with no, man. This SKT looks like a Swiss cheese right now with all the holes they've got. And if RNG plays how they did in the last week of group stage, they should run through Fnatic and then do the same to SKT.
Wait, who does the Latin American guy have?
He has predicted SK Telecom winning Worlds.
Yes, I'm in there. I'm right.
So there we go. Latin American North, he's got the final say. We'll see whether or not Kobe's going to jump ship or flip-flop, as the analyst desk has done so many times before. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion. We'll see you tomorrow. For now, that does it for us here in Worlds 2017. We'll be back tomorrow with Fnatic taking on RNG. We'll see you then.
Legends never die.
About to be onto the Rift, our second quarterfinal matchup. SK Telecom T1 versus Misfits Gaming.
Relentless usurper.
Talk comes in after the flash. They get turret side, and they're going to get first blood. Baker knows he can come in. Afari tries to get just away from the turret, dodging out on the top, but knocked back in, and Baker picks up kill number 2. They turn to Alphonse, knowing his damage from the equalizer comes in. His bang goes over the wall to take the 1v1.
Legends never die.
Legends never die.
Back.
Doggy's moving bot lane.
I go. Okay, you get him, I get up. Fine.
Doggy's moving bot lane. Take it, guys. Doggy's moving bot lane. Take it.
I've jumped. Good shit.
The cleanse comes out. Ignore, taken down before Cosmic Radiance. Oh, Baker pulled straight from the Valkyrie. It's my birthday. I'm going to grab some kills, and that's going to be a pickup for Hans Sama. The Nexus is going to be open, and Misfits are going to find the victory in Game 2 over SK Telecom T1. Barrier comes in, gonna get it! Blood onto Bang! Fight in the jungle still! Here comes Hardy! What's going down? 2 kills in the bot lane as Misfits pull the trigger! Axlor just on the end, gets it! Axlor! Misfits get buried!
Kill him. 좋았어, 노공. 오케이, 야, 여기 궁대. 와봐, 이거 자리 좋아. 이겨. 얘도
And here comes SKT right on top of Misfits. The damage is just too much, and SKT take the game. Here comes Huni. Obliterates power of evil. He had no chance to get out. Hans Sama falls, and Misfits is heading for their base. SK Telecom T1 will be your second team in the semifinals, claiming victory over Misfits Gaming.